The cold metal floor of the prison ship pressed against Skylarra's knees as two guards held her down. Her violet skin burned where they gripped her arms too tightly. Through the viewing window ahead of her, she could see the brown and green surface of planet LD 789 growing larger. "Any last words, traitor?" asked head researcher Melvin, her former mentor. He stood before her, his scaled face showing no sign of the warmth he had once shown her during their years of working together. Skylarra lifted her head, her large dark eyes meeting his. "The bioweapons program is wrong." Someone had to speak up. Her voice was steady despite her fear. Melvin laughed, the sound echoing off the ship's walls. "And look where speaking up got you. You could have been part of something great. Instead, you'll die alone on a beast world." The ship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Skylarra had studied LD 789 in research papers. It was classified as a death world, a planet so dangerous that even their military used it as a prison. The surface was home to some of the most aggressive predators known to the Vaxian Empire. "Prepare the airlock," Melvin ordered. One of the guards pressed a button, and the inner door slid open with a hiss. They dragged Skylarra inside. Her scientific pack, a basic survival kit given to exiles as a mock gesture of mercy, was thrown in after her. The pack contained enough supplies to last a week, assuming the beasts didn't get to her first. "Wait," she said, turning to face Melvin one last time. "The creatures you're creating in the lab, they're not just weapons. They're growing beyond your control. I saw the test results." "Goodbye, Skylarra." Melvin's smile was cold as he pressed the release button. The outer door opened, and the wind yanked her out into the alien sky. Skylarra tumbled through the air, her body spinning wildly. Her Vaxian training kicked in, and she spread her limbs to stabilize her fall. The pack was still within reach, and she grabbed it, clutching it tightly to her chest. The ground rushed up to meet her. At the last moment, her body's natural fall cushioning system activated, a feature of Vaxian biology that had evolved on their high-gravity homeworld. She hit the ground hard but survived, rolling several times before coming to a stop in thick, blue-tinted grass. Skylarra lay still for several moments, catching her breath. The air was thick and humid, filling her lungs with unfamiliar scents. Above her, she heard the roar of the prison ship's engines as it flew away, leaving her to her fate. Slowly, she sat up and looked around. She was in a clearing surrounded by tall, tree-like plants with spiral trunks. Strange calls echoed from the vegetation. Shrieks, growls, and sounds she had no words for. Something large moved in the shadows between the trees. Her hand shook as she opened the survival pack. Inside, she found basic supplies: a water purifier, nutrient paste, a simple cutting tool, and a small medical kit. They had even included a data pad, though its functions were limited to documenting her final days. The last cruel joke from her former colleagues. A loud crash came from the forest, followed by the sound of breaking vegetation. Something was coming closer. Skylarra quickly got to her feet, slinging the pack over her shoulder. Her scientific mind was already working, analyzing her options. She needed high ground and a defensible position before night fell. As she moved across the clearing, she heard Melvin's words echo in her head. "You'll die alone on a beast world." But she made a silent promise to herself. She would survive. She would find a way to expose the truth about the bioweapons program, no matter what it took. The sounds of pursuit grew louder behind her. Skylarra broke into a run, heading for a rocky outcropping in the distance. Her first test of survival on LD 789 was about to begin. 7 days had passed since Skylarra's exile began. She sat in a small cave high up on the rocky cliff, watching the twin suns set through the thick leaves of the spiral trees. Her violet skin was dirty and scratched, but she was alive. The first night had been the hardest. She had barely reached the cave when the razor wolves came. That's what she called them. Pack hunters with metallic scales instead of fur, their edges sharp enough to cut through wood. They had tried to climb up to her cave, but the rocks were too steep even for their clawed feet. Thylera looked at her dwindling supplies. 2 packets of nutrient paste remained, and half a container of water. The water purifier worked well with the small stream near her cave, but food would soon become a serious problem. She picked up the datapad and spoke into it. Day 7 survival log. I've observed 3 distinct predator groups in my area. The razor wolves hunt in packs at ground level. The tree stalkers, giant cat-like creatures, control the upper branches. But it's the shadow hunters that worry me most. They're smart, possibly as intelligent as a Vaxian child. And they're watching me. A screech echoed across the valley. Xylera moved deeper into her cave, her hand gripping the cutting tool. She had sharpened it into a makeshift weapon after her 3rd day. The predators here follow strict territories. She continued her log. The razor wolves won't enter the tree stalkers' hunting grounds. The shadow hunters seem to go wherever they want, but they avoid open spaces during daylight. I've used this knowledge to gather water and search for edible plants. A memory of her research lab flashed through her mind. If her colleagues could see her now, a respected scientist reduced to hiding in a cave. But her scientific training was keeping her alive. Every observation, every piece of data about the planet's ecosystem gave her another tool for survival. Thylera checked the cuts on her arm, souvenirs from yesterday's close call. She had found what looked like edible fruits, but a tree stalker had been waiting in the branches above. She escaped, but barely. The ground suddenly shook. Xylera crawled to the cave entrance and looked out. In the valley below, something massive was moving through the trees. The spiral trunks bent and cracked as it passed. Even the razor wolves fled from its path. New observation, she whispered into the datapad. Unknown creature, larger than anything recorded in official documents about LD 789. This suggests. She paused, her scientific mind racing. This suggests the planet's ecosystem has changed since the last survey, or someone is introducing new species. The thought chilled her. Could this be connected to the illegal bioweapons program she had discovered? Was LD 789 being used for more than just exile? A distant howl interrupted her thoughts. The razor wolves were starting their nightly hunt. Soon the shadow hunters would emerge too. Xylera moved to the back of her cave where she had piled sharp rocks as weapons. She had survived a week, but each day was a new challenge. She checked her makeshift calendar scratched into the cave wall. The rescue ships that patrolled this sector would pass by in 3 weeks. If she could survive until then, if she could find a way to signal them. Something scratched at the rocks below her cave. Xylera gripped her cutting tool tighter. One day at a time, she whispered to herself. Think like a scientist. Observe. Adapt. Survive. The scratching grew louder as night fell. Another long darkness was beginning on LD 789, and Xylera prepared herself for whatever might come hunting. The sky exploded with fire. Xylera watched from her cave as a burning ship cut through the clouds, trailing smoke and debris. The vessel was unlike anything she had seen before, not Vaxian design, but something more compact and angular. Human. The ship broke apart as it fell. The largest piece crashed into the forest several miles away, while smaller fragments scattered across the valley. The impact shook the ground, and frightened calls of beasts echoed through the night. Among the falling pieces, Xylera spotted something different, a small shape that moved with purpose rather than simply falling. A survival pod, or perhaps an ejection seat. It landed in the razor wolves' territory, much closer to her cave than the main wreckage. This changes everything, she whispered to her datapad. Day 15 of exile. A human ship has crashed. My people's archives say humans are dangerous warriors, but they also speak of their strange habit of helping others, even aliens. A distant howl made her freeze. The razor wolves had noticed too. They would be hunting. Through her makeshift telescope, crafted from scraps she'd found and her broken datapad screen, Laura watched the landing site. A figure in dark armor moved in the shadows, limping but alert. Even injured, the human moved with a soldier's caution. The human found high ground, a fallen tree leaning against a rock, and quickly set up a defensive position. Smart, but it wouldn't be enough. Not here. Not with what hunted in the darkness. Lara debated with herself. The human had weapons. She could see something like a rifle slung across their back. Those weapons might help her survive until rescue came, but approaching a human soldier, especially an injured one, could be fatal. The decision was made for her when the first razor wolf calls began. They were hunting calls, different from their usual night cries. The pack was organizing. The human must have recognized the danger too. They switched on some kind of light beacon. A call for help, probably, but it would only attract more predators. "Creator, help me," Lara muttered, grabbing her few weapons, the sharpened cutting tool and a spear made from a spiral tree branch. She knew the razor wolves' hunting patterns. The human didn't. She worked her way down from her cave using handholds she discovered over the past 2 weeks. The human's position was a 10-minute journey if she moved carefully. 5 minutes if she ran. The first attacks began before she was halfway there. She heard the metallic scrape of razor wolf scales and the sharp crack of the human's weapon. The gun's flash lit up the night, followed by pained yells. But more howls answered. The whole pack was coming. Lara moved faster, ignoring safety. She reached the clearing just as the razor wolves began their real attack. They were coming from all sides, using the strategy she had seen them use on larger prey. The human soldier, a female, Lara could see now, was firing with precision, but she couldn't watch all directions at once. A razor wolf leaped from behind, its metallic scales gleaming. Without thinking, Lara threw her spear. It caught the beast in midair, sending it crashing to the side. The human spun, rifle aimed at Lara, then quickly back to the other threats. The trees. Lara shouted in common space language, hoping the human knew it. "We need to get off the ground. They can't climb well." The human hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Together, they fought their way to a cluster of spiral trees. The razor wolves followed, but the human's weapons and Lara's knowledge of their hunting patterns kept them alive. As they climbed to safety, Lara caught the human's eye. She saw surprise there, and caution, but also something else. Something she hadn't expected to see in a human's face when looking at Avaxian. Gratitude. High in the spiral trees, Lara and the human soldier sat on opposite branches, watching the razor wolves circle below. The twin moons cast enough light for Lara to study her new companion. The human's armor was scorched from the crash, and blood stained her left leg. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen," the human said in common space language, her voice tired but firm. "United Earth Defense Force." She kept her rifle ready, but it wasn't pointed at Lara anymore. "I am Lara, former head scientist of biological research." She paused, then added, "Currently in exile." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Vaxian scientist. Your people aren't exactly known for helping humans. And humans aren't known for surviving on death worlds," Lara replied. "Yet here we are." A razor wolf leaped at the tree trunk, its metallic scales scraping against the bark. Both women instinctively moved higher. Sarah winced as she climbed, her injured leg nearly giving out. "You're hurt," Lara said. "I have medical supplies in my cave. Basic ones, but better than bleeding." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "Why help me?" "Because I've spent 15 days watching how this planet's predators hunt. You wouldn't survive another night alone." Lara gestured at the growing pack below. "And I wouldn't survive much longer with just a sharpened stick for protection." A new sound echoed through the darkness, a deep rumbling call that made the razor wolves pause their circling. Sarah raised her rifle, scanning the shadows. "Shadow hunters," Lara whispered. "We need to move. My cave is defensible. We can treat your wound there. And if this is a trap, Sarah's finger rested near her trigger. Then you'll still have your weapon, and I'll still be stuck on this planet. But if we stay here, the shadow hunters will find us. They're smart enough to knock down trees. The rumbling call came closer. The razor wolves began to retreat, a sign Xylera had learned to fear. Sarah must have read something in Xylera's expression because she nodded. Lead the way. But remember, I'm watching. They moved through the treetops where possible, using the natural bridges formed by tangled branches. When they had to go to ground, Sarah provided covering fire while Xylera guided them through the territories she'd mapped. At one point, Sarah stumbled. Xylera caught her without thinking. They froze, soldier and scientist, enemies by birth, now touching. After a moment, Sarah straightened, but didn't pull away violently. Thanks, she said quietly. They reached the cliff face as the shadow hunters emerged from the forest. Sarah got her first look at them. Tall, silent shapes that moved like liquid darkness. She raised her rifle. Don't, Xylera warned. Gunfire will draw every predator within miles. The cave is just up here. The climb was difficult with Sarah's injury, but they made it. Inside the cave, Xylera quickly lit her makeshift lamp. Bioluminescent fungi she discovered in her first week. Not bad, Sarah said, looking around at the organized space. She spotted the calendar scratched into the wall. You're counting days, waiting for something. Rescue patrols pass this sector every month. Xylera began cleaning Sarah's leg wound. I was hoping to signal them. My rescue beacon's still active. Earth forces will be looking too. Sarah watched Xylera work. Your medical technique is good. I was a scientist before I was in exile. Xylera applied a healing paste. Rest. I'll take first watch. Sarah's hand caught her arm. Why were you exiled? Xylera looked into the human's eyes, seeing not judgment but genuine curiosity. Maybe it was time to trust someone with the truth. Because I discovered something terrible. Something that might explain why this planet's creatures are unlike anything in our records. Outside, a shadow hunter screamed. But inside the cave, two unlikely allies began to share their stories. Morning light filtered through the cave entrance as Sarah cleaned her rifle. Xylera watched with fascination as the human's hands moved with practiced efficiency, even after a rough night's sleep. Your weapons are very different from Vaxian guns, Xylera said, sorting through her collection of edible plants. More elegant. Sarah smiled slightly. Elegant isn't a word most people use for assault rifles. She paused her work. Though I guess your people's plasma weapons are pretty nasty. That's why I chose biology instead of weapons research. Xylera offered Sarah some purple fruits she'd proven safe. I wanted to heal, not hurt, says the scientist who managed to spear a razor wolf. Sarah took the fruit, sniffed it, then bit carefully. Her eyes widened. This is good. Survival makes scientists of us all. Xylera sat down, wincing at her sore muscles. Though I admit, I never expected to test my theories about predator behavior quite so personally. A distant roar echoed through the valley. Both women tensed, but the sound was far away. You said Earth has predators too? Xylera asked, trying to distract them both. Sarah nodded, finishing the fruit. Lions, tigers, bears, wolves, but nothing like these beasts. We were prey animals once, you know. No claws, no armor, no natural weapons. Yet you became the dominant species. We had something better. Sarah tapped her temple. And we worked together. Learned to make tools, share knowledge, protect each other. Xylera thought about her own people's history. Vaxians evolved from solitary hunters. Cooperation doesn't come naturally to us. Maybe that's why exile is our worst punishment. We're supposed to die alone. That's messed up. Sarah tested her injured leg, seeming satisfied with Xylera's treatment. On Earth, Solitary confinement is considered cruel punishment. Humans need contact, community. Is that why you helped me last night? Community? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I helped because it was right. And you helped me first. She looked at Tylara. Why did you risk your life for an alien? Because. Lara struggled with the words. Because watching someone die when you can help, that's not science. That's not progress. That's what I was trying to tell them about the bioweapons program. Sarah's expression sharpened. What did you find? Before Lara could answer, something large moved past their cave entrance. They both froze. A tree stalker padded by, its feline body larger than both of them combined. But it wasn't hunting. It was running from something. That's new, Kylara whispered. Tree stalkers never abandon their territory. Unless something bigger is coming, Sarah finished. She moved to the cave entrance, rifle ready. In the valley below, other predators were fleeing too. Razor wolves ran in daylight. Shadow hunters barely bothered to stay hidden. All moving in the same direction, away from something. Your crash, Lara said suddenly. It wasn't an accident, was it? Sarah kept watching the valley but shook her head. Pirates hit us first. But when we entered this sector, something else attacked. Something huge, tore our ship apart like it was paper. The bioweapons program. Lara's voice shook. They're not just making weapons. They're making monsters. And they're testing them here. Sarah turned to her. Eyes serious. Tell me everything. As Lara began to explain, the ground trembled. In the distance, trees snapped like twigs. Whatever had brought down Sarah's ship was coming. But this time, neither woman was alone. A human soldier raised her rifle, and a vaccine scientist gathered her knowledge. Together, they prepared to face what was coming. In the valley below, something roared. A sound that didn't belong to any natural creature. The creature emerged from the forest like a walking nightmare. It stood taller than the spiral trees, its black scales shifting colors to match its surroundings. Multiple eyes dotted its elongated head, and what looked like tentacles lined with razor-sharp edges whipped around its massive body. From their cave high up the cliff, Sarah and Lara watched in horror. That's what attacked my ship, Sarah whispered, her rifle clutched tightly. We called it the Nightmare Queen. Lara's hands shook as she recorded with her datapad. It's one of their experiments, but it's wrong. The size alone shouldn't be possible. The energy needed to maintain such a large form. Science later, Sarah interrupted. Right now, I need to know how to kill it. The Nightmare Queen stopped in the valley below their cliff. All of its eyes turned upward, looking directly at their cave. It knew they were there. It's hunting us. Lara realized. Specifically us. Regular animals don't hunt like this. Sarah checked her ammunition. How many rounds do you think it would take to bring down something that big? More than you have. Lara pointed to the creature's scales. Look how they shift color. Some kind of advanced adaptive camouflage. Those scales must be incredibly strong to hold that much biotech. The creature moved closer to their cliff. Each step shook the ground. Its tentacles began feeling the rock face, searching for a way up. We need to move, Sarah said. The cave's not defensible against something that size. Wait. Lara was studying the creature's movements. It's not just hunting. Look at its behavior. It's testing us. As if to prove her point, one massive tentacle swung at the cliff face below their cave. Rocks shattered, but the creature didn't press the attack. It waited, watching their reaction. Testing for what? Sarah asked, already packing her gear. Intelligence, strategy. Lara's scientific mind raced. This is what I found in the labs. They weren't just making weapons. They were trying to create intelligent hunters, perfect predators that could outthink their prey. Another tentacle struck, closer this time. The whole cliff shuddered. That's insane, Sarah said. A weapon that can think for itself. That's asking for trouble. Exactly what I told them. Shy-Lara grabbed her few belongings. But they didn't listen. And now look what they've created. The Nightmare Queen let out a low rumble. Not quite a roar, but something more deliberate, more calculating. Then it began to speak, forming words in a deep, unnatural voice that seemed to come from multiple throats. Hide, run, think, it growled. Makes, hunt, better. Sarah's face went pale. It can talk. Evolution accelerated to impossible speeds. Shy-Lara said quietly. They weren't trying to make a weapon. They were trying to force evolve the ultimate predator. The creature's tentacles suddenly pulled back. It turned its massive head, considering them with its many eyes. Then it smiled, a terrible expression with too many teeth. Scientists made me, it rumbled. Now, I hunt. Scientists. Sarah grabbed Shy-Lara's arm, back of the cave. Now. They barely made it to the deeper tunnel when the creature's tentacles smashed through the cave entrance. Rock exploded inward. The tunnel protected them from the worst of it, but dust filled the air. It's not just strong, Shy-Lara coughed. It's angry, conscious. It understands who created it. Sarah peered through the dust at the now massive hole in their shelter. Please tell me this tunnel leads somewhere. It connects to other caves. I mapped part of it, but there are things living in the deep tunnels, things that even the shadow hunters avoid. The Nightmare Queen's laugh echoed through the destroyed cave. Run, deep. I follow. Sarah checked her rifle's light attachment. Things in tunnels, or that thing out there. Choose fast. Shy-Lara grabbed her glowing fungi lamp. Tunnels. At least down there, it can't use its full size. Together, they plunged into the darkness of the tunnel system. Behind them, the Nightmare Queen's roar shook loose stones from the ceiling. The hunt had begun. The tunnel darkness pressed around them, broken only by Sarah's rifle light and Shy-Lara's glowing fungi lamp. They had been moving through the cave system for hours, hearing the Nightmare Queen's pursuit behind them, the sound of rock being crushed, and that terrible, intelligent voice echoing through the tunnels. Wait, Shy-Lara whispered, touching Sarah's arm. Look at the tunnel walls. Sarah's light revealed strange markings, not natural cave formations, but deliberate cuts and shapes. This wasn't just a testing ground, Shy-Lara said, studying the marks. These tunnels, they're old research stations. My people have been experimenting here for years. A crash echoed behind them, closer now. The Nightmare Queen's voice followed. Found. Old home. Where I was born. Keep moving, Sarah urged, but Shy-Lara was already pulling open a hidden panel in the wall. Research terminals. Maybe there's something here about its weaknesses. Her fingers flew over the ancient controls. Sarah took up a defensive position, rifle aimed back the way they'd come. Make it fast. That thing's getting closer. Shy-Lara's eyes widened as she read. They mixed DNA from every predator on this planet. The razor wolf's metallic scales, the tree stalker's strength, the shadow hunter's intelligence. But there's something else, something about a control system. The tunnel shook. Rocks fell from the ceiling. A massive tentacle smashed through the wall behind them, its edges gleaming like knives. Move. Sarah fired at the tentacle. The bullet sparked off its scales, but it pulled back briefly. They ran deeper into the tunnel system. Sarah's light caught glimpses of old equipment, broken containers, and things that might have once been cages. The control system, Shy-Lara gasped as they ran. They'd built in a failsafe, a weakness in its genetic code, but they couldn't activate it because. The floor exploded upward. The Nightmare Queen burst through, its massive form somehow squeezing through the tunnels, scales scraping against rock, all its eyes fixed on them, glowing with hatred. No more cages, it roared. Sarah pushed Shy-Lara behind a fallen column and opened fire. The creature's scales flashed, deflecting most bullets, but some found gaps. Black blood dripped from small wounds. Because what? Sarah shouted, reloading. What about the failsafe? They couldn't get close enough. HFY looked around frantically. The control signal has to be almost touching it. They lost control because they couldn't reach its central nervous system. The Nightmare Queen's tentacles whipped forward. Sarah rolled away from one, but another caught her leg. She cried out as the razor edges cut through her armor. HFY grabbed her fallen rifle and fired at the tentacle holding Sarah. The creature roared in pain and dropped the soldier. The throat, Sarah gasped, pointing at the monster. When it roars, there's a soft spot. HFY saw it too, a patch of scales that shifted differently from the others, pulsing with a faint light. The creature's biological control center. Sarah, she said quietly, I need your last grenade. What? No, you can't. I'm a vaccine scientist. I know exactly where to put it. She helped Sarah up. But I need you to make it roar. Sarah stared at her for a moment, then pulled out her last grenade. Together. We do this together. They faced the Nightmare Queen as it gathered itself for another attack. Sarah raised her rifle and aimed at its eyes. HFY held the grenade, her scientist's mind calculating angles and timing. For a human, she said, you're not bad at cooperation. Sarah managed a tight smile. For a vaccine, you're pretty good at it yourself. The Nightmare Queen reared up, its full height scraping the tunnel ceiling, all its tentacles raised for a final attack. Ready? Sarah asked. HFY pulled the grenade pin. Like you humans say, it's now or never. The creature lunged, and the final battle began. Sarah's rifle flashed in the darkness, bullets striking the Nightmare Queen's eyes. The creature reared back with a deafening roar, exactly as they had planned. HFY saw her chance. She sprinted forward, ducking under thrashing tentacles. The grenade felt heavy in her hand. Time seemed to slow as she saw the pulsing spot in the creature's throat, the control center glowing with unnatural light. Now, Sarah shouted, firing her last rounds. HFY threw the grenade with all her strength. It sailed through the air just as the Nightmare Queen's mouth began to close. The grenade disappeared down its throat. Run. HFY grabbed Sarah's arm. They sprinted down the tunnel as the creature realized what had happened. The explosion rocked the entire cave system. The Nightmare Queen's roar turned into a scream of pain and fury. Tunnels began collapsing behind them as the creature thrashed in its death throes. There, Sarah pointed her light at a shaft of daylight ahead. They could see sky through a crack in the ceiling. They reached the opening just as the tunnel behind them caved in completely. Sarah gave HFY a boost, then climbed up after her. They emerged onto the surface, gasping in the fresh air. Behind them, the ground shook one final time. Then silence. Did we? Sarah paused to catch her breath. Did we kill it? The control center was its weak point, HFY said. The explosion would have shut down its enhanced systems. Even if it survived, it won't be the same creature. A new sound filled the air, the whine of engines. They looked up to see 3 ships descending from the clouds. 2 were sleek human rescue vessels. The third was a vaccine enforcement cruiser. Perfect timing. Sarah muttered, checking her rescue beacon. Now we just have to explain all this. The ships landed in the valley. Armed teams rushed out, weapons ready. But they stopped in confusion at the sight of a human soldier and a vaccine scientist standing together. Staff Sergeant Chen, a human officer, called out, "We picked up your distress signal. Are you?" He trailed off as Melvin stepped out of the vaccine ship, his face twisting with shock at seeing HFY alive. "Impossible," Melvin said. "You should be dead." "Sorry to disappoint." HFY stepped forward. "But I found something interesting in those old research tunnels. Files about illegal weapons testing. About experiments that broke every law of both our species." Sarah moved to stand beside her. We've got evidence of illegal bioweapons development, and we just took down one of your experiments." The human officer looked between them. "Sergeant, what's going on?" "Sir," Sarah straightened despite her injuries, "I recommend immediate cooperation with Vaxian enforcement. We have evidence of crimes against both our peoples." Malvin tried to speak, but two Vaxian enforcement officers were already approaching him, weapons drawn. They had seen the truth in Kyolera's datapad. "The exile speaks truth," one enforcer said. "We've suspected illegal research for months. This evidence confirms it." Hours later, aboard the human rescue ship, Sarah found Kyolera staring out a viewport at the death world below. "The enforcement officer says you'll be granted asylum on Earth," Sarah said. "Your testimony will help prevent more experiments like this." Kyolera turned to her unlikely friend. "Your people would accept a Vaxian." "We accept anyone who proves themselves." Sarah smiled. "And you've more than done that." "You know," Kyolera said thoughtfully, "humans have an interesting approach to survival. On my world, we believe in surviving alone. But you showed me something better." "Oh, what's that?" "That sometimes the best way to survive is to trust someone else." Kyolera looked back at the planet one last time. "Even if they're supposed to be your enemy." As the ships lifted away from LD 789, they left behind a changed world. In the deep tunnels, the remains of the Nightmare Queen lay silent. But on the surface, something even more unusual had emerged. A friendship that would help change two civilizations. And in the end, that was the greatest survival of all.